All right, welcome to another round of Let's Buy a Business. I'm your host, Ryan Condi, where we dive into all things acquisitions. Today on our YouTube channel, we've got Steve Keller, who is an incredible business owner. He actually went from a cameraman in sports, like working for ESPN, working big events, all the way through being his own cameraman, building his own business that way, to then buying 2 additional businesses, all within about 15 months, 16 months. The first one he bought for was about $120,000 in the crime scene cleanup space. What is that? I didn't even know that was a thing. Then he parlayed that into an acquisition 10 times bigger for $1.3 million, also in the crime scene investigation space. So crime scene cleanup space. Just blows my mind. This is an awesome conversation. We actually dive into a bunch of different things, how he funded and structured his first deal, how he funded and structured his second deal, how he even found that and won a very competitive bid. And then, of course, some of the tax strategies he's using, since his businesses kick off a lot of cash. He doesn't want to pay as much taxes, and we do some great tax deep diving that he can help you with. So feel free to click on the newsletter we've got here at the bottom. That newsletter will allow you to see new deals, see what's happening in the acquisition world, and get custom access or specific access to deals that aren't necessarily on the market. And the other piece is you can reach out to Steve there at the bottom, as we got a link there in the show notes. Thanks. All right, we're live. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so we've been back and forth. We finally got us same schedules. We're both healthy.
Yeah.
We're excited to dive in. Steve, you've got such a fascinating background. Give the audience a little bit about yourself before we dive into your career, acquisitions, and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so I was actually a camera guy in sports TV for the majority of my career. That's what I went to school for. I studied it at Michigan State and studied TV, radio, and film, and just kind of led me to. I wanted to be a camera guy. I wanted to work in sports. And lucky enough, I interned at ESPN when I was at school. And that parlayed into a job after graduation. So I landed my dream job right out of college. I mean, a few months after I graduated, moved out to Bristol, Connecticut, worked at ESPN at the mothership, and, worked on shows I grew up watching. I worked on SportsCenter. I worked on NFL Live, NBA shows, Sports Nation, you name it. I worked on a bunch of these shows. And I realized really quickly that the big corporate world probably wasn't for me. And it didn't take me long to kind of realize that. And so I was like, all right, well, what am I going to do now? And also, I wasn't really making very much money. I had student loans that I paid for. I had to get student loans myself to pay for college. And so I was like, I was running a deficit. I wasn't making enough money to pay my student loans and my crappy apartment and my car that was free. And so I decided, hey, I knew there was people in my space that were freelancers. And so I said, hey, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to bet on myself. So after a year, I quit ESPN and the job and bought my own equipment and went out into the world on my own. And so I bounced around a couple places. I went to New York for a short stint, and that ended up ultimately in Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. And that was on a political TV show, and worked there for a couple of years and then got back into the sports world and then started traveling again. So I worked on, I did 8 seasons of a show on the SEC network called SEC Nation. It was the college football, it was a college football show, kind of college game day, but just for the SEC. So that was a lot of fun. And so I did that for 10, 11 years and started, it's kind of interesting the way that I went to start, I went from employee to self-employed pretty quick. And I had picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I have a great quick story about how I found out about that book. But that's, I read that book for the first time. Are you a Rich Dad, Poor Dad guy?
Oh, yeah. I love the book.
Yeah. So that's how I realized, right? Like employee, self-employed, business owner, investor. And so I was just trying to figure out how to get through that matrix, right? And what were my next steps? So I worked on a political show in New York, and we had a guest on our show one day, and his name was Robert Kiyosaki. And his book was laying out in the studio, and it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I picked it up and started reading it. I bought it. That's how I read it. And now I look back, and I'm like, man, I was in the same room as Robert Kiyosaki, who now, and I've read all of his books now. And it's just funny that that's kind of what started. That's what started me down that journey and just started my brain was like, whoa, there's so many other options for me out there. And so I was really good at being self-employed. I loved it. I knew that, but I still eventually was like, man, I wanted to be a business owner. So I tried side hustles. I had done, everything under the sun that I felt. I flipped websites. I did some sales. I did a bunch of different things. My wife and I started a photo booth company for a while, and we sold that, which means we like sold the equipment. We really didn't sell the company. But I had tried to start a bunch of things that never got anywhere. And so I just kind of went through that, but always just fell back and kept working in TV. Well, then COVID happened in 2020 or whatever year that was. And I was like, well, I'm out of work for we don't know how long because sports shut down globally. And we found out my wife was pregnant with twins at the same time. So I was kind of, well, what the heck am I going to do now? Didn't know how long I was going to be out of work, right? At the beginning, it was like, could be a couple of weeks, could be a couple of months, could be a couple of years, right? It turns out it ended up being, a year or more before I started working in TV again. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to buy a small business. That's what I wanted to do. I had a friend who was a business broker. I worked for him for a little while, kind of learned a little bit about that world, and reached out to him. And I was like, hey man, I want to buy a small service business. Like what should I do? Where should I look? So I started looking, and I ended up buying my first deal not super long after I'd started looking, because I knew a little bit about that world and that space. And so the way that I found it was weird, but it was actually a broker who I bought it from. It was a broker's business. I was looking at one of his other listings. That listing went away. And we were playing golf together, and he was like, it just came up in conversation. I was asking him about this industry of crime scene cleanup. And I was like, I keep seeing these listed. I knew that he had been in that space before. And he's like, yeah, actually, I'm selling my company. He had started a couple years prior. He had been in a franchise of that same industry in a different market and sold, and then moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, started up a private company in the same space, crime scene cleanup, hoarding cleanup. And I was like, man, this is a wild industry. Well, I ended up buying his company. So that was my first deal. And it was a small deal. I bought it for like $120,000. And so I was very involved. I had to figure out a lot of stuff. And so
were you doing the crime scene cleanups?
I had been to a couple of them, but no, I'd only really helped on a couple of jobs. For the most part, there was people that he had a crew in place. I had hired some other people, had some part-timers, and then ultimately found the staff that I have now, my main core people. And so now I don't go out in the field at all, but I did go out in the field at first, and I'd helped on and I'd seen a couple of really nasty crime scenes in person. And crime scene's the buzzword. Like really it's after death cleanup. Like it doesn't have to be a crime has occurred. So, so like unattended deaths.
Some 90-year-old passed away at their home and you're
Sure.
helping out.
Yeah. Unattended passings, self-inflicted passings, like harsh things, right? Like reality, but not great things to deal with. And so I started to learn a lot about this industry, and was doing well enough with it, grew the company enough to where I could walk away from TV. So I worked one more season of football, worked in TV for one more year, and then decided to call it quits. Walked away from that, got to get off the road. I traveled a lot in that space. And so now I was like, man, my kids were 1 year olds, and I have twins. And so I was like, I just don't want to be traveling anymore. I want to focus on this business. And so that's what I did. And then because I guess it's just like in my DNA, I don't really know. I just was still looking. I was always looking for more businesses to buy. I wasn't saying like, oh, I want to buy another one, but I was still always looking. And I came across another one, and it was another crime scene cleanup company, but it was much bigger, and it was in a different market. It was in Florida. So it was a different state. And I was like, man, I don't even know. Does this even make sense? So I went down that path. I reached out. I flew out to Florida. I met the owner. We talked. I submitted an LOI, and lo and behold, before you know it, now I own two of them. And this one was a much bigger deal. I had to go get an SBA loan. Had to go through that whole process. Had to fork up more cash, out of pocket cash. Actually, less out of pocket cash in my first deal, but more risk, right? And we can talk a little bit about deal structure and those things too. But yeah, so now I own two of them, and you can bet I'm still looking for more. So I feel like I'm just getting started.
You're the first person I've met who's rolling up crime scene cleanup is or whatever the politically correct term is for that. So first off, Steve, like pretty amazing. I would imagine working for ESPN's got to be like the dream job. You're a cameraman. You're working, you're right in center. You're with the athletes, you're on the field, all those fun things. Decide to make that shift. When you first looked at this acquisition, you said it was about 120,000. That's sort of a weird range to finance. There's not really any financing options. Did you just have to put all cash down? Was there a seller note involved? And you knew the seller. So what did that conversation look like as you guys were playing golf? And like, how did that morph into like, hey, I'm going to buy your company?
Well, I started asking him about that space because I knew he'd been in it. And that's where he came up. He's like, didn't really want to bring this up, but I'm actually selling mine. It's a smaller deal. It might be a good fit for you, but I didn't want you to think that I was trying to like sell you my business. Right. And so I was like, well, no, tell me about it. Like, I've met you. We started to become friends. We played a little golf together. I trusted the guy. And so I was like, I'd rather buy from somebody that have a little bit of rapport with. And so we started to talk about it, and it just made sense. It was the right size, it was the right time. And the industry was intriguing enough for me, and what I knew about it from learning from him, I was like, wow, I think this is a really good opportunity. Didn't finance it, didn't get any seller financing, paid cash for it, but I borrowed money out of our retirement accounts to pay for it. And at the time, another COVID assist was the CARES Act that was in place at the time allowed you to borrow money from your 401k or your IRA or retirement funds. And as long as you paid them back within 3 years, you basically give yourself an interest-free, penalty-free, tax-free loan. And so I could pay it back, put the money back in there with no interest, penalties, or taxes. And so that's what I did. I borrowed the money out, and then we put the money back within 3 years, paid back myself and the loan, and then that's how I was able to acquire it. So I don't have any debt in that current business. And so that's kind of how that deal fell into place. And then it's just been, how can I grow this business now? And we've grown for sure quite a bit. I haven't even owned it for 3 years. It'll be 3 years this May. So, but we've more than doubled revenue, more than doubled our profits. And now knowing what I know about the next business that I bought, a super exciting future because I kind of have a blueprint for how to get to the next level because I just bought one that's at the next level.
Well, you're cracking the code. When you go deeper and deeper into an industry, you're able to apply that knowledge across the board. Whereas if you went and bought a Sonic or a fast food restaurant, you're like, there's nothing that really applies hand in hand. That's fantastic. What an interesting business. One thing you said right at the beginning of that stuck out with me that I've seen with my own journey, I've seen with a lot of searchers, Steve, is you said, right time, right size. And I think that's an important time. And an important thing to realize is, hey, there are a lot of great businesses out there, and not all of them are great for you specifically. But you found one that you felt comfortable with. It was intriguing. You felt like you could grow it. It was the right time, the right size. 10 years from now, that may not be the right size. And 10 years ago, maybe it was the wrong time. But, it could even be 2 years. But I thought that was interesting. You said right time, right size. Then this opened up into, did you find this second acquisition? I know the second one's a lot bigger. You used an SBA loan. Like you said, it's actually kind of interesting. You probably put less money down, but of course you're personally guaranteeing everything and giving up your firstborn, and in your case too, right? Did owning the first one put you in the crime scene cleanup industry, and so you were aware of the other ones that were there, or is it like you just found it on Biz Buy Sell and sort of the normal process, or was there any sort of benefit to owning your first business that allowed you to get to that second one being in the same industry, even though it was a different location?
Yeah, it was. I found it on Biz Buy Sell but I was always looking because I was like, man, if there was just another one of these for sale, and so I would look. I'd use the keyword search in Biz Buy Sell, and I would open it up to the whole United States, and I would just look for crime scene as a keyword, biohazard as a keyword, hoarding as a keyword. And I still do that to this day because I want to know what's out there on the market. And that's how I found it. There's actually 2 listed at the time. And so there's always a handful listed in the United States, but they're almost always established franchises. And so I wasn't interested in that because I already had one that's not a franchise. And I had looked at, man, if I bought another one, even if it's in another market, I had talked to a franchisor. They said they'd make me convert my existing business into the franchise. And it was just a whole thing. I was like, I just don't want to go down that road. And so I was looking, and there was only 2 in the entire United States at the time that were non-franchised for sale in our space. I reached out to the first one, and the guy was like, the broker, I talked to him. He called me right away. He was like, man, we've had so much interest in this business. It's run pretty much semi-absentee or absentee, I think. Had great numbers. I forget what state it was in. It wasn't in Texas. And he's like, we had, over 10 offers in the first 2 weeks of it listing. They were under LOI. he was like, it's going to set, like, we chose the strongest offer that, the one that we thought was going to close, like there should be no issues. It's like, okay, well, there goes one down. And then I reached out to the next one, and they also had interest from multiple parties. And so, but we had some good conversations, and that just kind of started so I went further down that road. And so I think the thing that benefited me from the first one was now I had the confidence to go do a personally guaranteed $1.3 million loan. Because I did actually did an AMA, an Ask Me Anything, in a Facebook group that I'm a part of, and I got a ton of really good questions. And one person asked me, knowing what you know now, would you ever buy the small one or would you buy the big one first? And I was like, man, that's a really good question. Because knowing what I don't know, because it's hard. I don't know if I would have had the confidence to do it. It would have been a bigger leap, right? And just a big jump to dive in your very first deal, SBA $1 million loan. Now, know what I know now, I would tell other people, I think between the two, the success rate is going to be higher in the bigger business, in my opinion, for my experience in the two businesses that I bought. But you really got to be pretty confident to go do that. And I don't even know if they would have sold it to me. That's the other thing. They, feeling
comfortable. They may not have accepted your offer.
Exactly.
Right? Because
yeah.
You didn't have the experience.
And so I don't think it would have been possible without it. But who knows? But yeah, they had to feel comfortable selling it to me. Their employees, they want to, keep, they owned it for 20 years. They started it, grew it for 20 years, and then sold it to me. So they want to see it continue on and succeed. And so for them, it was important that I had industry experience, and that since I wasn't going to move to Florida and I was going to manage this thing and own this thing from another state, that I had the experience and that I had some success in the company that I have here in Texas. And so I think that's what the first one those are the opportunities it created for me to go to this second one and go, I'm going to aggressively go and try and get this thing under contract and buy it and actually close on it.
Well, Steve, one of the most common questions I get is, hey, do I go big? Do I go small? And I think you did a really good job of actually answering that better than I ever have. And it really comes down to right time, right size. And then this allowed you to get into the industry, the knowledge, the confidence that you needed to go bigger. And then in the next one, you went, 5, 10 times bigger, right? So I don't necessarily say everybody should go buy a $120,000 business, but at the same time, you probably wouldn't be where you're at today without that first one. And it's cool to see you do that. Everybody's going to ask, how do you run this business remotely? Was it run remotely before? Now you're in Texas, it's in Florida. Do you run it remotely? How often do you have to go out there? What does that look like?
Yeah. It was not run remotely before, but towards the end, and I think the seller did this on purpose, where she started to remove herself more and more from the business towards the end. And so she had by the time I bought it, there was a business operations manager in place, and that person did a lot. And so one of my key questions during due diligence and during the whole process was, hey, can that business operations manager, do they have the qualities or the experience or the skill level to be a general manager, to really run the show? And they gave me really positive feedback on that, and they thought they could, and they thought that there was, some certain areas that she's going to need some more experience in that the owner still did, specifically on the sales and marketing side. And so I felt pretty comfortable with that. As soon as I met her, I was like, oh my gosh, home run. I got really lucky.
And at what point did you meet her? Was it when you were under offer? Or?
No, I did not meet. I met her and the entire staff about 2 minutes after the owners told them all that the company was sold. And then they brought me into the room.
Agreement signed, money's wired, escrow, all that fun stuff. Okay.
Yep, everything's done. I go down to Florida, and it's like we had planned it out. Hey, I wanted them to tell them first. It was their employees. They wanted to be the ones to break the news. And it was like some new guy to come in and be like, hey, I'm the new owner. Yeah. Here I am. So they had their time to do that, answer questions, alleviate some concerns. And then I stepped in. So then I met her, and, it took a little while, right? Everybody was like, whoa, this is a big change, shocked. Nobody saw it coming, all those things. And so, but it didn't take me long to realize, like, oh yeah, this person is the general manager, hands down. I know I'm gonna have to pay her more. She's gonna take on more responsibility, but she wanted to do it. That was the other key question I asked. I said, do you think she would want to do this? Right? It's one thing for that person to be it, but if they don't want to do it, doesn't matter. You're gonna have to find somebody else. So And she did, and she does. And so we have built a really great relationship in the short, just a couple of months that I've owned it. And that's how I manage it remote, because she runs the day to day. And I am able to work on the business from Texas, where I don't have to be there. I don't have to see the employees every day. I don't have to approve PTO. I don't have to run payroll. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I just talk to her a lot, right? We talk all the time. Yeah.
Are you using like a Slack? Are you texting? Is it phone calls?
We're texting we're texting, and like our meetings are done via Zoom. So, and we're kind of reshuffling our meeting structure a little bit, but we were kind of just doing the meetings that they had done before, but I would just attend those via Zoom. And I knew the previous owner didn't attend every single meeting either, right? Like, so if she was ever out of town during a meeting, she would Zoom in. So I was like, okay, well, we know it's possible. And, what's like me being there in person for that meeting, no different than me being there via Zoom. Obviously, you're mostly worried about like team morale and do they trust and know who I am, those things. So I did spend, as soon as it closed, I went down there for a week. And then like 2 or 3 weeks later, I went down there for another week. So in the first month, I was down there for like half the month. And now I haven't really figured it out fully yet, but I would say maybe once a quarter. This year, I'm going to have to go more because we're moving. We're going to have to eventually move the space that it's in. And so those types of things will have to get figured out. But yeah, I really got lucky. I have an operator in place who runs the show and allows me to do the things that I'm best at as far as the business goes.
That's pretty awesome. With your operator, it sounds like one was already established to begin with, which is just critical to the business. Now you own 2 of these businesses. I don't know anything about the industry. When you evaluate these things, are you looking at opportunities for marketing and growth? Is it PPC, or like, how do you get front and center of clients or customers, potential partners? How do you grow these things?
Yeah, great question. The thing I really liked about this deal was my business in Texas relies heavily on PPC, SEO, and that type of paid marketing to get our phone to ring. They built their entire business on outbound sales to referral partners. So they do a ton with law enforcement, victims advocates, funeral homes, medical examiners' offices, you name it, to get people to refer them business. And they did no PPC. And so I was like, wow, I'm just going to be able to go, what they do here, I'm going to do there.
Other from the other.
Exactly.
Awesome.
So I'm super excited to take what they do really, really well in Florida and implement it here. And then I've already got my Google Ads team running Google Ads there for them to start getting our internet calls up. And so in the other area for growth that I recognized during the due diligence phase was I thought that they were not billing properly to insurance, and they weren't. And so I recognized that during due diligence because I'd been in the industry. I know what my insurance bills look like. Part of due diligence was I said, hey, send me 10 of your most recent insurance bills. I want to see what they look like. And as soon as I got my hands on those, I was like, whoa, there is a massive opportunity here to bill more to insurance because they're not billing properly. And so I kind of kept that in my back pocket, and I was like trying to be conservative with it. I was like, even if I can increase our billing to insurance by 15%, going to be a huge impact, right? Well,
it's all pure
we were
profit.
able to,
There's no
100% straight to the bottom line, right? And so we were able to increase it much more, even substantially than that. And so right out of the gate, it was like, whoa, we were able to have huge growth just from that, right? Which are very simple things, right? When you think about buying a business, you're like, there should be some small little wins that you can do that increase revenue or increase profitability. That doesn't have to like completely change the whole business or doesn't have to double in size or do anything crazy. It's like, but you can find some nice little incremental wins. And so I think that's and they had the blueprint for that, for getting the jobs, and they get the best jobs. And that's why they're so profitable compared to my Florida business, because they get all the insurance jobs. Whereas I don't get as many insurance jobs here, and I have to do more hoarding, and I have to do more of these other like private pay, just cash pay customer jobs. Whereas they're dealing with almost all insurance pay jobs there.
Wow. I think that establishes of like, when you know an industry, you can look at another books or business, the inside of a company, and immediately identify, oh, these are the areas I know how to work, right? And of course, you wouldn't have bought the business if you didn't see those areas for improvement and everything. Steve, I know we don't have too much time left. One of the things that you had mentioned, I want to touch on, is we have a lot of business owners and future business owners who are listening to this podcast. You had talked about some tax migration strategies through a trust when we were texting back and forth. Just maybe kind of bring me up to speed. What have you done in that space? Talk to me a little bit about that, because I think it's actually applicable to a lot of people listening here.
Yeah. So when I did this deal, I had found out about a trust. There was huge tax mitigation opportunities with this vehicle by using a specialized trust. It's written specifically for these certain tax codes, IRS tax codes, like the things that allow you to save tax dollars in different ways. And so I had implemented it before I bought the business in Florida. So I had put the trust in place. And so from a high level perspective, my trust actually is a 90% member of my LLC. So I personally only own 5% of the business. And my brother, who also is in on the deal, owns 5%. So all that means is that at the end of the year, when, the net income of the business on the P&L would typically 100% would flow to me if I owned 100% of it. LLCs are just pass-through entities, right? So it would go to my personal tax return. Well, now only 5% of the profits of the business are flowing to me and then flowing to my personal tax return, and 5% to my brother, whereas 90% of it is flowing to my trust. And the way that the trust is written allows me to defer the income tax on those dollars in perpetuity, as long as I don't distribute those monies to beneficiaries in any given year. So whenever I distribute those monies to beneficiaries, which are my kids and my wife, then it would go to their personal tax returns. But the key is, in order for me to be able to use that money tax deferred and not have to pay taxes on it by not distributing it, I'm allowed to have, the trust has expenses that it can pay for. So it can pay for education and healthcare costs for its beneficiaries. So specifically, I have twins that are both in daycare. That cost me over $30,000 a year to send them to daycare. So my trust can now pay for that with tax deferred dollars. Right.
30% to that or whatever. Yeah.
Sure. And then the big strategy is you sell what most people do, and what I've done is I sold all of my personal assets to the trust. So I don't own my home or my cars or anything in my home. Any other asset that I have of value is now owned by my trust. I've sold it to the trust at cost basis. And so what that means now is my trust, a bunch of my biggest personal expenses related to my home and my cars, and anything related to my home, like all of my bills, electric bills, internet bills, cable bills, you name it. Those are all now trust expenses because the trust owns the asset. So now I can use those tax deferred dollars to pay for mortgage, taxes and insurance, pool guy, lawn guy, house cleaners, cable, electric, you name it, right? You start to be like, whoa. And so same thing with the cars, right? Gas, tire rotations, insurance premiums, or insurance deductibles. If you ever have to file an insurance claim on your house or your car, right? You start to realize, like, man, that combined with the stuff for my kids is a huge part of my personal expenditures, just for my overall overhead and my family. And so that's how I have it set up and structured. And it's really, really powerful for tax mitigation purposes, obviously. And then I'm growing wealth inside of the trust, hopefully to pass off to my kids. There are a lot of other benefits to it, high level, like I don't own any assets personally anymore, really. So I'm a little bit less attractive of a target for a lawsuit. And then it's not a typical type of trust that when I die, all the assets get transferred from me personally to my kids personally, or whoever my beneficiaries are. Since the trust is, I'm just the trustee of it. So whenever I pass away, somebody else will just become trustee and be able to manage it, but the trust will still own all of the assets. So just a bunch of cool things that you can do in that environment, especially with it being tax deferred environment, allows for a lot of powerful things, especially when, we're looking at how much revenue and profit this business in Florida is now going to start producing for us. It's going to be a really, really huge, way for us to keep those tax dollars in that environment to continue to grow.
So we might need to do a second episode here, part 2 here, Steve. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions with that. Do you have to start off with a trust, or can you sell a business to a trust and then sort of do it?
Yeah, so you can do it later.
Your assets to the business, or to the trust. Can you do that for the business?
Yeah, you can do it later. So I did it first because I was going through the SBA and they were like, hey, if you're going to do something like this, like do it on the front end. It'll be easier because then we don't have to do it later with the SBA. There's rules. I also don't think it's impossible if you have an SBA loan and a business to do it after. They were just like, if you're going to do it anyway, and this was like my SBA closer at the bank was like, just do it now. And I was like, okay. So I set it up on the front end. But yeah, so really all you do is if you just change your operating agreement with your LLC. Right. Yeah. So now instead of if you 100% own your LLC, so if you're single member, it would have to get changed to a multiple member LLC because now it's going to be you personally and the trust personally as members. And all that happens is the trust gets a K1 and it's considered passive income to the trust. And that's why it's deferrable. So that's why there still has to be an LLC in place. You can't run the business directly out of the trust. Well, you could, but then it would be considered active income to the trust, and then it wouldn't be tax deferrable. So you do have to have that separation. That's why people just typically change their LLC structure if that's what they have in place. Some people create new entities and do that. Could do it. There's a bunch of different ways to do it depending on everybody's situation, if they have partners and how it's all set up.
Where can people learn more about this, Steve, or connect with you to do something like this?
Yeah, the easiest thing is my website, stevekellerconsulting.com. It's got a little bit more information there, got ways to contact me, ways to book a call. And I consult on it. I consult on it for free. I don't charge anybody for it. If people decide to work with me to help them put this in place, I get compensated by the people who produce the trust and help them put it in place. So, yeah, I'm just trying to provide value. And when I found out about this, I was like, I didn't necessarily plan on, being a proponent or, selling it or sharing it with other people. But I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And I'm just a business owner and I was just a camera guy not long ago. And so there's a lot of people who don't know about this. And I was like, man, it could be so powerful for so many people. And so, yeah, I really just kind of decided to say, hey, I'm going to consult with people on this. And I've had really, really positive feedback on it. And it's already helping a ton of people put a pretty powerful piece in place for them, their business and their families. So
that's pretty awesome. So we'll link to that, stevekellerconsulting.com. With just a minute left here, Steve, final question for you. What's the weirdest way or most creative way you've seen people make money?
Oh man, I knew this question was coming too. I don't have one that jumps off the top of my head, and I know I'll think about one later and I'll text you about it and be like, man, I wish I'd have said that. I mean, look, before I bought 2 crime scene cleanup companies, I did not know that you could make money cleaning up after people passed away. So
it never dawned on me that was a job. But I guess that makes sense. Like someone's got to clean it up, right?
Yeah. And most people don't know it's a thing until it happens to them, unfortunately. Right. And they have a bad thing happen. And then they find out that everybody leaves, right? The police officers leave, the detectives leave, the medical examiner leaves, and then they're like, what do I do now? And that's when they literally find out that our types of companies exist, and they have to find somebody that they trust to come take care of it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Steve, thanks so much for a few minutes of your time. We'll link to all that there in the show notes.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. First off, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. 3 years ago, I started a podcast and YouTube channel on a whim. Recorded over 280 episodes, and I had no idea this weird niche would take off like it has. Been able to meet tons of awesome people like yourselves, but also I get a lot of the same questions over and over again. So my background is I bought 7 businesses, built 5, and sold 4. I brokered over 24 businesses in the last few years and been a part of another 15 other transactions. But the questions I get are all the same, right? So how do I value a business? Is this a good business for me? How do I buy this business? How do I structure a deal? Well, I'm launching right now how to buy your first small business through acquisition entrepreneurship. Okay. It's a course. It's everything I know about buying businesses. Buying a company is closer in reach than you think. And this is how I've done it, right? So this course will save you dozens of hours, which if you value your time like I do is quite critical. You can find more at letsbuybusiness.com/course, or just click the link there in the show notes or here in the video and it'll take you right there.